at this moment to form a final judgment.
Do you think that the gap between the two parties narrowed very much in the last few days?
I think it's very hard to say. The evidence for that will be based on the public opinion polls, but I think they've got a lot of explaining to do. It could be that the, as I would feel, unscrupulous exploitation of 1 month's trade figures, which we all know don't mean anything very much, might have caused some people to feel that the economic strength, which is a very real economic strength, is not as strong as we and almost every other country in the world have said.
You did say yesterday, you accused Mr. Heath of lack of patriotism in bringing up this question of the strength of sterling.
I think it's very irresponsible for any statesman of any party to start playing politics with sterling.
Do you think that means it will cause dangers for sterling? Mr. Heath,
well, the reaction actually to what he said wasn't taken very seriously, was it? Forward sterling rose and sterling has remained very strong despite what he said.
Prime Minister, what do you think went wrong with what seemed to be a very popular and successful campaign?
I think it's very hard to say. It's much too early to start to analyse the situation. We've had tremendous enthusiasm and signs of a very big vote. In some constituencies, what looked like being a very large vote, which would have put us in, has turned out to be a somewhat smaller vote.
Do you think it was a mistake to fight the campaign, as many people have remarked that you did, so much on the assumption that you'd be returned in terms of the style of the campaign, rather than fighting to be returned?
That wasn't the style. I was fighting by taking the fight right into the constituencies where the decisions would be taken. I visited 50 marginal constituencies, including some Conservatives, some Conservative-held constituencies. I wouldn't call that conducting a campaign on the basis of an assumption we were going to win, quite the contrary.
But your appearance
I mean, the alternative
during the campaign was always, you looked as though you were the man who was going to stay in office come what may.
Well, I had a number of hecklers, most of them good-natured, a few eggs, of course, but the only way to deal with hecklers is to laugh at them.
What part do you think that Mr. Powell's speeches on race and on the enemy within may have had in swinging votes to the Tories?
Well, I always thought that there would be an adverse swing to us in the constituencies round about his own, particularly those fought by power-like candidates, which, as I've warned, Mr. Heath has got to cope with. Not to mention the Paisleyites that may be coming into the House of Commons. And where Mr. Powell has spoken for his candidates, it's put us in a very difficult situation. But, of course, there will be a serious reckoning for that. But I'm very, very glad that we held Smethwick, where we had an anti-racialist candidate who fought with great courage and held the seat.
But do you think that Mr. Powell's speeches and the role of Powellism led to Labour voters deserting to the Conservatives in other seats and leading to this 4.3%?
No, I think in the areas nearest to him, as I say, it has had some effect. The swing in the other Wolverhampton seat, for example, was probably a sign of this. But in other parts of the country, decent people, and I'm thinking of Liberals, I'm thinking of the decent fringe of the Conservative Party, our own people, people who feel strongly about racialism, whether because of their church views or anything else, have probably come out more solidly for us.
Could we come to the polls now? Do you think that your party paid too much attention to their prognostications in the run-up period before the election?
I never have. I took no notice of them when they showed a 28% Tory lead a year ago, and I paid no attention to them now.
But you did take the advice
all they've succeeded in doing is to contradict one another, I think.
You took the advice of members of your party, and one must assume that they had perhaps made their minds up on the basis of the way the polls were going.
What do you mean I took the advice of them? I didn't.
You didn't take the advice of members of the party?
No, I felt that it was right to have an election at this time. The Conservatives were pressing for it, though in the last week they've been complaining that I had a June election, when I think they thought they were going to lose. But nevertheless, I think it was right. The electioneering had developed to such a point that it might have been bad for all the things that the government of the country had to put through.
Why do you think that the polls have shown such a wild fluctuation? People I've noticed on the programme this evening have been saying it's the British people telling the polls that they can mind their own business. Why do you feel that they've shown this erratic pattern? You're a statistician.
I think that's for the polls to explain, isn't it?
You're a statistician. I thought you might have some comment on...
No, I never comment on polls.
Do you think that the question of Conservative organisation, which was the one thing that they stuck through even when the polls were running very badly against them, they always said, well, we have our ear to the ground and in our organisation we're confident we'll win. Do you think that was
would be a very
superior?
cynical view. If that was so, they would be saying that a majority of the British people wanted a Labour government, but they hoped by their very expensive organisation to get more Conservative candidates returned. Against that, we had the enthusiasm of our own people. But there are such marked regional variations, swings in some cases to Labour against the trend, the national trend, that I don't think you can generalise about these things.
Could I just put to you a remark Mr. Heath made earlier on? He said that there hadn't been any consultations between the Conservatives and your government on the question of taking over office, as there were in '64 when Labour came into power, according to Mr. George Brown.
That's not so. In 1964, in fact, it was not until Parliament had virtually stopped sitting that the head of the civil service, on his initiative, not mine, had some talks with me about the machinery of government. There were never any talks about taking office. Indeed, Sir Alec Douglas-Hume, when the head of the civil service wanted to talk to me, said it must be on the basis that no one would make political capital out of it, that I wouldn't, of course I didn't intend to, because it was on the initiative of the head of the civil service. There were no talks at that time at all, because the Conservatives naturally said they were the government. They weren't going to act on the assumption that Labour would win. And, of course, we remember that election was a very, very close-run thing, as this may prove to be.
Could I ask you to comment just briefly on the defeat of your long-standing colleague George Brown at Belfast?
Yes, I think this is a terribly tragic thing. I think he's expected this, not only in this election, I think he thought he might lose in 1966 because of housing movements in Belper, which all the time were worsening it from his point of view. He could nevertheless have won this campaign in Belper if he had spent his whole time there, as his opponent did. But I think every tribute is due to him for the fact that he did what no one else in any party can do. He carried through this great barnstorming campaign through the country, as he did in 1964 and 1966, did great benefit to the Labour Party, and I think he sacrificed his seat, as it has now turned out, to his loyalty to the party, which of course has never been in dispute, because he is a very, very great servant of his party.
Prime Minister, with the computer predicting now a 43 Conservative majority, are you prepared at this stage to concede defeat?
No, certainly not. As I say, it's fallen from 100 to 43. I'm not sure about your computer, because in this part of the world I haven't been able to see everything that's been said, but I think it was the BBC computer itself that fell from 100 to 43. Just as in 1964 they were giving me a majority of 30, and I didn't think we'd get a majority at all.
So you're still hopeful at this stage of the evening?
Oh yes, I'm going to leave the situation for comment until we've seen all the results from all the seats, because there are such wide regional variations.
What are your immediate plans?
To go back to London, as I'd already planned.
Prime Minister, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Wilson, talking there to David Dimbleby. Let's quickly bring you up to date on some of the things. Recount there in Sheffield Heeley, Mr. Hooley there, recounted Reading, recounted Sowerby, recounted Lichfield and Tamworth. But there have been doubts expressed, Robert Mackenzie, there have been doubts expressed here by the Prime Minister now and by Mr. Heeley.
Well, I must say that I hate to disagree with a fellow of the Royal Statistical Society, especially as he's still, for another 24 hours, Prime Minister. But I don't think there can be any doubt at this stage about the outcome. The computer did give a very high figure on the very early results when it was just giving the average swing, which was inflated by the figures from Wolverhampton and to other places in the West Midlands. But since 126 results were in, the computer settled down at a prediction of a majority of Conservative over Labour of 43, and they brought that down.
Yeah, I must stop you there, because we're going now to Cardiff for a declaration.
John O'Brien,
Liberal.
2,701. Michael Hillary Arthur Roberts,
Conservative.
21,983. Keep quiet a minute, please. Edward Rowlands,
Labour.
20,207.
Butler.
That was a Conservative gain in Cardiff West on a rather low swing. It was the most vulnerable Labour seat in Wales, and it went to the Conservatives on a 2.6% swing. They did, of course, gain another seat in Pembroke. If I could return to the general theme of whether the Prime Minister is right to refuse to concede. Obviously, he may be right to refuse to concede, and Prime Ministers in the past have, until the other side has gained the 316th seat. But I certainly have no intellectual doubts whatsoever that the Conservatives will be in with an adequate majority. I actually share Bob Mackenzie's view and Mr. Wilson's hope, not as a hope, but just as an observation, that the majority will be less than 43. In fact, the latest computer thing has brought it down slightly to 40. But there is no area of the country, there have been 1 or 2 isolated seats, but there's no area of this country that has been showing a swing to Labour. And even in Scotland, on which he pinned his hopes, almost all the swings we've been having have been to the Labour Party. There is a recount in Pollock where, to the Conservative Party. There has been a recount in Pollock where the Conservatives might gain, that Labour might regain, or the Conservatives might hold the seat they won in the by-election. But there is no sign of the Conservatives picking up seats, and they now need the Labour Party picking up seats. And the Labour Party needs to win seats from the Conservatives, quite a lot of seats from the Conservatives, if they are to win. There's even a recount in Dudley, which was a seat, which was a rock-solid Labour seat, the most extreme swing ever in a by-election, and that is having a recount. I really don't think there can be any doubt at all about it. The Conservatives are in with a majority of between 20 and 50, beyond any shadow of a doubt.
Beyond any shadow of a doubt, it was Cardiff North that we were talking about, not Cardiff West. Cardiff North, and Robert Mackenzie now, please.
Well, I can understand the Prime Minister clinging on to the hope, which is just a possibility that he might still recover his position. But the fact is, at the moment, he has lost his majority in the House of Commons. The Labour Party has suffered 37 net losses. It needed to suffer only 33 to lose its majority in the House. He therefore have to begin to win seats elsewhere to recapture his position, and there just isn't any sign of that. There are only 18 out of 71 results in from Scotland, where he could still do well, but the swings so far don't suggest he's going to do well enough to begin regaining seats in the situation. So there are 37 net losses. 33 were needed only to knock out the majority.
And now stepping into our comment seat, I see my colleague, the man with whom before we come to you later, we're going to Rutherglen.
A reduced majority, a majority of 3,041, about 2,000 down from 1966.
Now, it's a classic case of putting the gun up and the rabbit's gone. Ludo, anyway, Ludovic Kennedy.
Well, for me, there have been 3 really sad moments this evening. One was the face of Jeremy Thorpe in North Devon. Another was the face of George Brown in Belper, and the third one was the face, just a few moments ago, of the Prime Minister, Harold Wilson, at Highton. What a contrast that subdued and chastened face was to the face we've seen these last 3 weeks. Everybody now is looking forward to the new Conservative government. But I look back to the last 2 or 3 weeks, to the press conferences at which the Prime Minister got cockier and jauntier and gayer every day, and whatever he may say about the polls now, he seemed to get more and more jaunty the more the polls declared that he was going to win. He seemed to be a mixture between a statistician, a juggler, a conjurer, and a music hall turn. And all the jokes about to the hecklers about not being angry that Mr. Heath hadn't come because he was their leader, all those jokes which have now fallen so flat. And one remembers how everyone said that this was a presidential election, and that as a president, Mr. Wilson was the only possible candidate and Mr. Heath didn't have a chance. Well, one wonders now if he wished he'd played things a little, perhaps less jauntily, a little more humbly. He said that the polls had some explaining to do tomorrow, and indeed they have, but one feels that he's got some explaining to do to his followers as well. One feels also inclined to say that as from today, Mr. Harold Wilson will never quite be the same man again. But knowing him as one does, in a day or two, I'm sure he'll be just the same as ever.
Let's just pick up on that Rutherglen result, which we just missed the declaration of. It was the declaration of George Mackenzie, Gregor Mackenzie, rather, I beg his pardon. It was the Labour Member of Parliament. He's been there since 1964 and still holds on to it. Now let's look at the state of the party. Let's take a look at the state of the parties at 228.
some 38. They required only 33 losses to lose their majority in the House, and they now must therefore make some quite unexpected spurt to regain their majority. Liberals, the sad picture, retaining 1, losing 3. Only the Liberal leader is back. If you look now at the lead board, the Labour lead over the Conservatives,